Good morning. I'm Dr. Velasquez, Health Officer for Spokane County. Thank you for joining us today. And today with me, I have our Community Health Program Manager, Josh Pierce, because we're going to have a very important conversation about a topic that a lot of people don't talk about, but we should, which is gun safety. So, Josh, thank you for joining us today. I want to mention to the folks, if they drove by our building last week, that the lights on top were all in orange. And some people may not know why that is. And the reason for that is because the first Friday in June is Gun Violence Awareness Day. So very apropos that Josh could join us today, so thank you. Now, in public health, we typically talk about preventing disease, preventing injury, et cetera, et cetera. And we have done, and you and I have worked on a lot of efforts for prevention, accidents, drowning, fire, smoke, all kinds of prevention. So what lessons can we apply from those to gun safety?
You know, it's a really good thing. So we talk about safety in car accidents. You know, many decades ago, seatbelts weren't required. Then through research, we're like, why are people getting injured? It's because we're not wearing our seatbelts. So then laws were put in place so that we could go ahead and have more seatbelts in place, and we've reduced injuries and fatalities because of it. Right. We look at drowning. We do a lot of preventative education. We talk about the importance of wearing a life vest, making sure that's fitted correctly and such like that. Really, as we look at firearms, firearm safe storage is just a prevention tool for unintended consequences. Firearms are definitely a way of life and part of our culture, especially here in Spokane County, which is perfectly fine. But we just want to make sure that we're doing all the necessary prevention, having the conversations with our family and kids in a positive way to prevent injuries and unintended accidents, but also safely storing those firearms. And one thing you talked about was the building being orange for the gun violence awareness. Over the weekend, there was an event at the Northeast Community Center where we actually gave out 138 safe firearm storage devices free to the community. And our goal with that is, again, with the prevention, but to help ensure that firearms are safely stored when they're not in use.
Well, wonderful. I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that is part of reaching out. That is part of prevention. So you said firearm safety. I'm glad you used the term firearm because it's more than just guns. I mean,
right.
So firearms. So what are common misconceptions about firearm safety in your travels? What have you heard?
You know, when you look at firearm safety, there's a couple of things. Like when we go to handle any form of firearm, whether it's a shotgun, a rifle, a handgun, whatever it is, we want to make sure that we're making sure that the weapon is empty before we're using it, that it's unloaded as we're handling it. Every firearm we pick up, we should just assume that it is a loaded firearm, but we want to make sure that it's clear and empty as we're going to go ahead and handle it. Always pointing it in a safe direction, keeping our finger off the trigger, and then we want to really know what our background is if we're going out to the shooting range and what's beyond it. And as you talk about unintended consequences, we have beautiful landscape around us, but if we're going out to the forest and we're shooting into the trees where we assume it would be safe, it's knowing what is beyond our targets, because we could have on the other side people that are camping out in the wilderness, and then that is a form of an unintended injury or fatality that occurs really from just sport, but we didn't know what was beyond our targets. So there's a lot of things that go into firearm safety, along with just keeping it safe or just the basics of handling it and then knowing what's beyond our targets.
Okay, and I'm glad you mentioned the going out in the woods because you cannot assume that you're the only person out there. And there's also animals, all kinds of things that we have to worry about. Now, whenever we hear about firearm incidents or accidents or issues, let's focus on that incident. What happened, whatever it was. So as a community, what factors may influence firearm safety and help with the prevention of accidents?
Those are a really good question. So when you when you're highlighting, like, we'll hear about a sentinel event, right? So if there's a drive-by shooting or there's a child that had unintended consequence with a firearm and was injured or hurt somebody else, we hear about that on the news. But what we don't hear about are all of the people that unfortunately committed suicide through an intentional act that involves a firearm, which is very high for people. And then we also have, you know, the accidents we've seen in the news a couple of times with a couple of dogs in different states that have had a firearm laying on the seat of the car and have accidentally hit it with their paw and pulled the trigger. This is because it wasn't safely stored when it wasn't in use and it wasn't under someone's control at that time. So you had these unintended consequences that happen from it. So when we think about firearms, they do impact a lot of people in our community. We hear about certain things in the news, but when we think about the unintended consequence of, the firearm was left out and a kid hit it and then it accidentally shot someone in the house in the leg and they had to go to the hospital. It wasn't done with malice, but it's an unintended consequence
Right.
because it wasn't safely stored, or it wasn't safely stored in someone's bag and it went off and injured them. And then again, like I was saying about the suicide, is having it locked away is an extra prevention step that people have to go through to get it to complete the act, and they may have some moments of reconciliation before they do that.
Okay. So a couple of things, as you were talking, a couple of things came to mind. One is we use terms like culture of safety around a lot of things, and some people are going to say, well, I don't own a firearm, so that doesn't really, why do I have to know anything about it? So if you were to talk to the average person that does not own a firearm, how can we as a community make sure that we are all safe and those that may have a firearm or maybe around a firearm are safe too? What would you say to that?
I think if we were to go back, we could look at one of our other campaigns that we've done with normalizing Narcan and just keeping Narcan with you, right? Is starting to really normalize safe storage of firearms when they're not in use. So if you're using it or something like that, obviously it's not going to be in storage. But if you're not using it, just make sure that it's safely stored. If we start to have these conversations open and accept that it's just normal to have your firearms in some form of a safety storage or a lock or a cable lock or something on it, it's just really normalizing the idea that we're going to have our firearms safely secured when they're not in use.
Wonderful. And as we say that, I see on the table a couple of things that may be useful for you to explain to the audience what these are.
Yeah, thank you. So what we have right here is our typical cable lock. A lot of firearms that are sold, whether they're different pistols or even some rifles, even some long guns, shotguns, etc., have different cable locks. So it's really a simple process with the key, and then the cable lock will actually feed through the mag well of the firearm, and then through the action or the chamber. And then once it's locked up, I want to take the keys because this is a very hard cable to cut through so that it renders the firearm safe. The other thing that we have here is a trigger lock, which I'll go ahead and show us how we're going to go ahead and use it.
It's like a steel cable. That's really hard.
It is.
Good.
It's like a strong bike cable that really is difficult to go ahead and break through. And then what we have here is what we consider the lock box, and it has a combination code. There are boxes that also have keys on it. There's good and bads about all of them, but the combination lock, if you know the combination lock, you don't necessarily have to share it with anybody else.
Right.
So then no one else would know what that code is. But if you have keys, if you leave your car keys on the table and there's somebody else in the house that shouldn't have access to your firearm, they could just pick up the keys off the table and then go ahead and go into the room or wherever you're safely storing your items and then go ahead and open it. And so we don't want that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up our lockbox that we have here. And much like I was talking about earlier, anytime we touch a firearm, so this is a airsoft pistol. It has a safety orange on it, but we still want to go ahead and make sure we're pointing it in a safe direction. And anytime we were to take a firearm, we always want to make sure that it is open and clear. Since this is an airsoft pistol, the action right here won't open, but we would want to visually and physically inspect that it is empty, putting our finger in the mag well, make sure there's no magazine in there, and these kind of items, and then make sure that the weapon is unsafe. Always point it in a safe direction away from everybody. So what I'm going to demonstrate right now is I'm going to go ahead and take out our trigger lock.
Okay.
So when we go to put the trigger lock on, it is important, I'll do it backwards, that we put the trigger lock behind the trigger. And the reason for this is if you go to depress the trigger, if the trigger lock is behind it, nothing will happen.
Right.
And then when we go to put the other piece of it onto our firearm, and then we lock it, even though there may be a little bit of play, and this may rotate a little bit, we still have the same disability of the trigger, so it cannot be depressed. This is really good if we have long guns in the house or something like that, where we may not necessarily have a cable lock for it, or we may not have a really big tall safe that we're putting it in. So trigger lock is super important, and it's super portable and small and easy, and these are fairly inexpensive to go ahead and purchase.
Got it.
So I'll go ahead and take this off now. And this, again, is also a combination lock that it has so that you can set so there's no keys that are required with it. So it is also important that if you have a magazine, that when you're safely storing the firearm, you unload the gun completely and that you take the magazine out so they're stored separately. Now with this lockbox that we have right here, it does have a space for a cable lock. So this cable lock, if we want to safely secure it to a fixed object that is within our house or our vehicle or something like that, we have the ability to loop it and then secure it, and then this piece just pops in right here. And then as we go to close it and lock it up and then we change our combination, essentially what it prevents is a box walking away and having unintended consequence. So we can safely store firearms wherever we may be, in a camper, in a car, in a house or something like that. But it is important that if we're going to go and use this, that we put this to a fixed object that isn't something that's portable. So I wouldn't necessarily attach it to our chairs in our office,
Right.
because the chair can go with you or you can get it out and around. But it's something that's sturdy and safe that we have.
So that's an extra level of protection.
It is. Again, firearms are definitely part of our culture, and it is very much so acceptable to have it. But if you're going to have firearms within your house, it's always a good idea to have conversations with your family, talk about safe storage, how to safely handle a firearm, make sure it's always empty before you go ahead and you manipulate it and you're moving it around. Always point it in safe direction, keeping the finger off the trigger until you're ready to pull the trigger and shoot. And then again, when you are going to any range, wherever you're going to be shooting it for sport, is knowing what your target is and really what's beyond your target so that there's no unintended consequences. And if you are having somebody in your house or you yourself are experiencing mental health concerns and thoughts of suicide, it's okay to have that conversation with somebody else. Call 988 for resources and talk to somebody, see a therapist, because unfortunately what we see a lot with firearms, as you talk about those injuries and fatalities that happen, is also from suicide.
Right.
So we just want to make sure that as we're talking about safety storage, it is that extra barrier for someone before they make that unintended consequence.
Wonderful. And as you were handling this gun, I noticed that pointing at the floor, pointing down away from us, and your fingers were up, not
Correct.
like that, and you were handling in such a way that there wouldn't be any accidental discharge, although this is not a real gun, but that was the right way to do it, and I hope people were watching that, because that's a way to stay safe. Now, firearms, like anything else, what else should we be know about? Things like maintenance. What should we be doing to make sure that our firearms are in good working condition to prevent any accidents?
You know, it's a good thing you talk about that. I actually just had a friend last week that called me up and she's like, I really need to go ahead and maintain my firearm and I need to clean it. Opposed to me giving her instructions over the phone or saying go watch a YouTube video, I suggested to her to go to a gun dealer and then have them in person walk through all the maintenance of a firearm. They can teach her how to break down the gun, how to clean it safely, and they themselves also have the ability to go ahead and clean the firearm if they offer that service there. So if you're not super familiar with firearms and haven't taken courses in firearm safety, I would highly recommend that you go to a gun dealer and just ask them how to do it. Have them demonstrate it for you in person so that you understand how to care for it, how to clear your weapon, etc. Take it apart and put it back together because there's a lot of pieces, and some firearm dealers will actually go ahead and clean it for you.
Wonderful. So that's good to know, because a lot of people say, well, it's in there, it's been there for a couple of years.
Right.
It's like everything else. The firearms, like any other tool, any other instrument, those require some maintenance, and that's one of those things that we can forget about sometimes. So anything else you want to share with today's audience in terms of firearm safety?
Yeah, firearms are definitely part of our culture, but I do highly suggest going to a gun dealer or to a shooting range if you are not an experienced shooter, you're a novice, you want to learn. There's a lot of people that are even experienced shooters that also go to firearm dealers and different shooting ranges and take classes so that they can build their skills and become more advanced. There's really never a point that we ever stop learning, much like in healthcare, we're always taking continuing education to learn new skills and get things. So even someone who's an advanced firearm user could still benefit from going back and having some classes. So I highly recommend to the community, as firearms are part of our culture, is it's okay and safe to go to a shooting range and start seeking out education anywhere from beginners all the way through advanced.
Wonderful. And by the way, I do know a lot of people that own firearms, that hunting, and I don't do it just because I much rather somebody goes to work and bring me stuff back. But they all are very careful in terms of maintenance. They're all very careful in terms of storage. And I know they all go and practice routinely to make sure that they are as accurate and as safe as they can be, although they have a lot of experience. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Don't assume that just because you bought it, picked it up, okay, I'm ready to go and I know everything. And every gun and every firearm is a little bit different.
Yes.
So knowing one doesn't mean that you know all of them. Always make sure that you're prepared to effectively use the ones that you have. Or if you get a new one, that you're equally prepared to use that one for whatever purpose you need, whether it's hunting or anything else. So,
no, I appreciate that. And, really safe storage, while there may be some debate about it, it's really just a responsible thing as a gun owner. If you talk to many gun owners, they feel like it is safe to have their guns locked away and secured so that there's no unintended consequence.
Well, nowadays there's some that are biometric.
Right.
So they tag into your either your fingerprint or even facial recognition, so it's very safe, it's very fast, there's no delay in getting access to your weapon if you need it. So I want to say thank you to Josh and to all of our partners, because we do work with many of our partners on firearm safety. Thank you to our partners in law enforcement who help us with a lot of information and a lot of access. And I'm glad that you mentioned the event where we were able to share with the community of 138 storage devices, which is great. So not being able to get one is not an excuse. There's always places that can help you. You can go to our website. You can go to a firearms dealer. You can talk to law enforcement. They all have services that can be made available to you. And if you have any issues from mental behavioral health perspective, number is 988. Please don't be afraid to call. They will help you, they will guide you, and they'll make sure that you're safe. So with that, we're going to say thank you to Josh and the team. Thank you to our audience, and we will see you again next week. Stay safe and stay well. Thank you very much.